Hello, and good evening, and welcome to Salon Lockdown. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Helen Bagnall. I'm the founder of Salon London, which is an organisation designed to help us to get us together with the big ideas of our time. I'm also the founder of the Also Festival. Which some of you may know us from. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Why We Eat Too Much, the new science of appetite with Andrew Jenkinson. I'll be introducing him in a moment. You can just see him behind me here. But before we start, I'd just like to say a couple of hellos to people. I'd like to say hello to all the members of the H Club where we were supposed to be tonight for this salon, and particularly to Jo and her team. I'd like to say hello and thank you to the Salon London members. Thank you so much for supporting us by being members. A very quick hello to Mum and Dad. Hello. And Julian B, who I know is watching. And then a very quick couple of hellos to Salon Friends who really helped us last weekend when we became the first summer festival to broadcast all of our content digitally. Jill and Justin, thank you so much. And Philippa, thank you so much. So this is how it's going to work. I'm going to be in conversation with Andrew for about 25 minutes. Our plan is to stop just before 8 o'clock so that we can all take part, or if anyone wants to take part in the Clap for the Carers initiative, that you'll be able to do that. We're going to come back at 8:05, and then I'm going to start putting your questions to Andrew. For those of you who haven't joined us for one of these salons before, you'll be able to see on the platform there's a comments field, and you can kind of put your questions in there. I can see them and I can put them to Andrew. It's really simple. So I hope that you will do that, and please do take the opportunity to ask Andrew any of your questions about appetite and weight loss. So it just remains for me to introduce Andrew Jenkinson. So Andrew has written this book, Why We Eat Too Much, the New Science of Appetite, and his book is based on his findings of over 20 years experience as a consultant surgeon based here in London at University College Hospital, where he's been performing surgeries to help weight loss for people who haven't been able to lose weight by conventional methods for reasons we are going to understand in a lot more detail tonight. So hello, Andrew.
Hi, Helen. Pleasure to be here.
How are you?
Very good, actually. Yes, yeah. Not too bad at all. Lovely day and things.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it. I think you're our first doctor on Salon Lockdown, so I am really glad that it's a Thursday, and I'm glad that we can all
Good.
Yeah. So I've got to say, Andrew, I was quite worried reading your book, a little bit resistant. You know, I think diet has been one of the things that's been quite difficult during lockdown. But I've got to say, after I read it, I felt so much better, because you began to see really clearly that when it comes to weight loss, the dice are really loaded against us. You know, we're not imagining it. It is actually really difficult to lose weight if you follow current advice from medical and nutritional experts.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say, you know, the reason that you wrote this book, and you're very clear about that, was that you were very encouraged by your patients, and I think that's a great place to start. Can you tell us why were you encouraged by your patients to write this book?
Well, sort of more inspired, really. First by the patients. So my job is a bariatric surgeon. So I do the laparoscopic keyhole surgery to either remove or bypass someone's stomach. The people have got sort of intractable morbid obesity, so they've been dieting for years and years, sometimes decades. And as I got into this sort of new area of bariatric weight loss and metabolic surgery, so I learned how to do the operations quite comfortably. But as with most doctors, my education around weight regulation was pretty simple. It was basically if you just start counting calories, start to have a little bit and go to the gym, you will lose weight. But when I started speaking to patients in outpatients, before their operations and then afterwards, the stories that I got were very similar. And so this would be over a number of years, slowly the penny dropped. But something that we didn't really understand as physicians, as doctors, was going on with people struggling with their weight regulation. So patients would come with very similar stories. The most common stories would be, yes, I can lose weight on the diet, I can do it, but I can't keep it off. It would go back on, and then I would probably gain even more weight than when I started the diet. Another thing they would say is that they thought they had a low metabolism compared to their flatmate or someone else they're observing. And the third comment that they commonly made was that they thought it was something to do with genetics. They had a family predisposition to gain weight. So all of these sort of stories, combined with the fact that once we do the surgery, they would just get people totally they'd escape from this sort of dietary, this obese trap that they found themselves in for decades. Inspired me really to look into it in a little bit more detail, exactly how our weight is regulated. It's not even taught in medical school as a system, weight regulation. We learn about the heart, we learn about the lungs, we learn about the kidneys, but we don't learn about how our weight or energy storage is controlled. So this was the inspiration for the book.
It's really interesting. It's quite a cheeky question, but it's something I was really surprised to read, and I just wasn't sure. How much nutrition is taught when you're doing your medical degrees? How much do you learn about nutrition and weight loss?
Well, yeah, not much at all. So that's the average medic will have probably a modicum more understanding of weight regulation than a tabloid newspaper reader, and it really is ingrained in most doctors, including GPs. Most GPs will tell you to go on a diet and go to the gym to lose weight, and you'll come back and you say, the main story is that many people will go on a diet and starve themselves on, for instance, 1,200 kilocalories a day, and they will lose some weight. But then they find that the scales aren't shifting anymore, despite complying with the diet. Somehow their body was adapted to the lower calorie intake. They go and go back to the GP and say, look, this diet isn't working anymore. And the GP, not understanding metabolism, will say, well, I don't believe you must be cheating on it. So this is the story I got so much from patients. But when you look into how humans are able to metabolize and change their metabolism, depending on whether they're overeating or undereating, it sort of explains, the struggles that dietists have. And I think the book starts off in the first chapter where we look at, how over the last 20, 30 years, Western populations probably eat about 500 kilocalories per day more than they did 20, 30 years ago. And if you then sort of calculate that into, your energy in, energy out equation, we should be putting on as a population, about 20 stone per year. But actually as a population, we gain about 1 pound a year. So half a kilogram or 1 pound per year. So over a number of years, obviously 20 or 30 years, that becomes a big problem for the population. But actually, if we didn't over-metabolize because we're overeating, we would, as a population, balloon within a year. And the evidence for that is in the book. So there's a lot of research looking, research that's not that well known, which looks into the adaptation of the body to overeating. And then if you say, well, okay, if humans are trying to adapt to overeating by over-metabolizing, then does this explain why when we put people on diets, they can lose weight at first, but then it just stops? And exactly the same answer, yes. So we have really powerful means of determining of changing our metabolic rate. So, for instance, in the book, you can look at a cohort of 10 people who are the same age, height, and weight, and you would sort of normally, as a doctor, would be trained to say, yeah, okay, we can put this into a complicated equation, and we can work out your basal metabolic rate. So this is the amount of energy that you burn before you even move, which actually accounts for about 70% of our energy expenditure. And if you look at the height, so if you look at the sort of population of 10 similar people, if you look at the top one against the bottom one, metabolizer-wise, there'll be a difference of 700 kilocalories per day, which is the equivalent of like a 10K run. So one guy is getting that advantage over another of the equivalent of a 10K run every single day. So you can, our bodies can beat the gym. They can save that amount of energy to stop you losing weight.
And I want to talk about some of that in more detail, but I really want to make sure that people are coming, coming with us through your ideas. Before I unpack that a bit, though, Andrew, are you okay to come a little bit closer to us? Yeah, and yeah, I think that's going to sound a lot better. There's a little bit of a difficulty with sound on your last answer. I just want to make it absolutely clear so people understand what you said. You know, there is this general idea within the sort of medicine, within medicine, that when it comes to weight loss, it's as simple as energy in terms of calories and energy out in terms of exercise, and that's the kind of accepted idea. But we've got to forget that, right? It's just not that. Yeah, that we've just got to completely forget that.
Well, I mean, that's the first law of thermodynamics. So, like any organism will have that law. So that's basic physics. So that's what the conventional understanding of obesity is based on. This very simple principle that an organism, when it takes in energy, if it doesn't use it up, it's going to store it. But what that equation fails to take into account is the massive variation we have within our bodies to be able to either over-metabolize and get rid of a lot of energy by just burning it off, or under-metabolize and save a lot of energy. So that equation is the final crux, but it's a lot more complex than that, in that we're not as in control as that equation would suggest we are.
Yeah, and so and you talk about a lot of the diets that people might know, and it's a real kind of nostalgic look at some of the diets of yesteryear, from Rosemary Conley to South Beach to Atkins and keto is slightly different, but a lot of the diets that we tend to go on when we want to lose weight are about calorie restriction. And when you're doing a diet that has got calorie restriction, you will lose weight for the immediately. Most of us will, but it becomes very, very hard to keep off. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, and this comes to the crucial part of the book, which is this weight set point theory, which explains why dieters can't over the longer term just shift their weight down and keep it down. It always rebounds back up to a predetermined weight.
Can you just define what that is for us? Can you just define what the weight set point is for the?
Yeah. So, I mean, having spoken to hundreds of patients, maybe a couple of thousand patients, they always say, "Look, I'm just stuck at this weight. It'll drift up very, very, very slowly. But if I go on a diet, my body seems to know where my weight setting is, and it gets back after 6 months. It'll get back to that level, and then they won't gain any more weight." So this sort of concept of every individual having their own individual weight setting, whether it's in the normal zone or in the overweight or obese zone. And if we look at animal experiments in rodents, overfeeding mice or rats and then starving them and then letting them actually, just eat normally again, they will always regain weight back up to the particular weight setting where their contemporaries who haven't been on the diet are. So the weight set point is backed up by quite a lot of science, but the main thing is it's really backed up by actually what people experience. And it can be really explained where your weight set point is determined by your genetics, probably about 70% determined by your genetics, but also environmental factors. So what's around you, the sort of food that you eat, your stress level, and the quality of your sleep. And it's not as simple as calories at all. So, for instance, the two main things in the book, well, actually three main things in the book that determine your weight setting, as far apart from genetics, would be the level of insulin in your bloodstream, the level of cortisol in your bloodstream, and the ratio of these fatty acid vitamins in your fat. And these three things determine whether your weight setting is set high or low. And just expanding on that a little bit. So if for instance, I started treating you with insulin for diabetes seamlessly without you being aware of it, you would become more hungry and your body would want to put weight on. Your weight setting, when I treat someone with insulin, would automatically go up, and you may end up a stone heavier. You may try and fight it by trying to starve yourself or going to the gym, but that weight setting is always there. So suddenly you're struggling. If I then took that insulin away, your weight setting would go back down to where it is now. And in the same way, if we're exposed to a Western diet with a lot of refined carbohydrates, sugar, snacking culture, our average insulin levels of a population go up, and the weight setting of that population follows. It's the same thing with cortisol, the steroid hormone cortisol, which people will give for rheumatoid arthritis or whatever. If they gave you that, your weight setting would go up. If it took it away, your weight setting would go down. Cortisol is involved in the stress response, lack of sleep, very many different areas of Western life. So the book expands on how to reduce both your insulin level and your cortisol level to reduce your weight setting without counting any calories.
Yeah, it does. It really does give a step-by-step guide of how to do that. I found it quite a chilling sentence in your book that it said that our energy for our bodies, the energy storage is too important to be left to free will. Is the amount that we eat under our conscious control?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of evidence now that certainly where I work at UCL, there's a lot of research into the gut-brain axis. So these nerves and hormones that come from the stomach and the intestines and travel through the bloodstream to the hypothalamus, which is the center of your brain that really controls both your appetite and your metabolism. That's the controller, that's the master controller of your weight. And certainly there's a lot of emerging evidence that these hormones will drive you to eat. And this is why, when you go on a low-calorie diet, your food-seeking behavior increases significantly, and it becomes more and more and more difficult the longer you're on the diet. And this is because of a couple of hormones. The main one is called ghrelin, which is secreted by the stomach, and the more you've sort of dieted and skipped meals, the higher your ghrelin level. The body's telling you, this hormone is telling you, look, we've got to go out and eat. And it's a very powerful hormone. It's as powerful as the thirst hormone, so it'll drive you. It can drive you crazy. I mean, there's a description in the book about the Minnesota starvation experiment where people started fantasizing about food. These guys that were starved, to see what would happen to them metabolically. There lots of strange things. Some of them went crazy. They're fantasizing about food. They were getting seriously bad mood if their small dinner arrived late. So, as most dieters will attest to, it can certainly have an effect on your appetite.
Yeah, and and I think I just wanted to make that point because I think a lot of us who have kind of experimented on and off with diets over the years, have felt really let down by our willpower, and felt really let down by our inability to stick to something, and then continually piling on the pressure to to do more about it, to be able to be more restrictive, and then finding yourself sort of out of control with your food choices. Worst point, or just watching food TV 24 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it's a constant struggle because you're sort of trying to get on the bandwagon of the latest fashion diet, which doesn't address your weight setting. It addresses calories usually, or going to the gym or whatever. And you're constantly, so your weight setting hasn't changed, but your weight is going away from the weight setting. So you're getting, the further away you get from that weight setting, the more difficult it becomes, the more the voracious appetites secondary to these hormones explode within your body. And secondly, the amount that you become very, very listless and irritable because your metabolism is shutting down, your body's preserving energy.
I was really thank you. That's a really, really helpful answer. And I know we spoke before we started about yo-yo dieting and the effect that can have, and again how it can make things so much more difficult to diet the more you've done that, and especially over decades of life. I do want to cover genetics. It was really interesting. You just said it then. You say it in the book that, did I hear it right? 70% of your weight is dependent, or your weight set point is dependent on your genetics. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's, the book goes into to describe various twin and adoption studies. So every country has a database of identical twins, so exactly the same DNA, who, for whatever circumstances, have had to be adopted. And were adopted into different families, and so were separated, at birth, and didn't see each other, and had totally different home environments. And these studies encompass many Western countries. I think in the UK we have about 700 pairs of identical twins that were adopted into different households, and they are great material for researchers looking into anything to see whether it's determined by genetics or environment. And when you look at these people, identical twins, 30 or 40 years down the line, and you look at their body mass index, so their weight, you'll find that there is about a 70% concordance with genetics, and only actually about 10% concordance with home environment. So the sort of conventional thinking is that the home, bad eating habits and bad play habits and whatever determine whether you're going to struggle with obesity or not. But actually, these studies suggest that actually it's only about 10% influence on your obesity level. So it sort of exonerates this feeling when you see a poor family that their children have become obese. You can't blame the home environment. You have to look at the genetics.
Yeah, I think it's another absolutely amazing point. If you looked at media coverage or of that issue, it just wouldn't be replicated there. And I think,
but actually, to jump in there, there's sort of like a bit depressing for people saying basically there's 70% of my weight I can't change because of my genetics, but the genetic predisposition to put weight on is only triggered with a particular sort of Western food and stress environment. So if you're genetically predisposed to gain weight, but you're actually in an environment where there's a lot of most of the food is natural food, natural fats, natural food culture, then that genetic predisposition to put weight on won't be triggered.
Yeah.
And we see this in the Pacific Islanders who've got a massive genetic predisposition just from the fact that the migration to inhabit those islands was thousands of miles by sea, a couple of thousand miles years ago. So there was a big attrition of people who didn't make that trip and didn't populate that area. You had to be pretty strong and metabolically, quite efficient, or actually, fat before you made the trip. So those islands were populated by naturally metabolically hardy or obese people. And they harbored these genes for centuries until the Western environment came to the Pacific Islands, and then suddenly that time bomb was triggered, and they just exploded into the biggest problem with obesity in the world. And that's explained in the book why that is, why that happens. That big genetic predisposition to it due to that difficult migration.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about the triggers. As you say, there might be a genetic predisposition, but there are these triggers that can or cannot happen. And before we go for the break, I just wanted to mention I was absolutely shocked when I read in your book that we might have found it easier to get our lunch on the streets of London in 1820. In terms of nutritious food than we do in 2020. Yes. Is that right?
Well, that was, it was surprising when I looked into, this actually Victorian golden age of dieting, where I think in the book it suggests that if you made it past the age of 5 when you were in Victorian times, even if you're from the slums or very poor, your average life expectancy would be the same as a working class man today. So if you made it past the age of 5, you would probably live up to 75 years, which is the same as a working class man today, despite there being an absence of Western medicine. And the reason for that is actually by sort of luck and chance, they had a fantastic diet of lots of fish, lots of great vegetables, not all that much carbohydrates. They didn't drink as much. They didn't smoke as much as now. So there was a lot in the environment that was, really going for them.
Okay, so
once they got past that age of 5.
in some ways, we can talk to Andrew about this after the short break. But maybe we'd be better off following a Victorian man's diet than we would a caveman's.
Yes, we can talk about that. Yeah.
So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
And welcome back. So just before the break, I was asking Andrew if we might be better off following a working Victorian man's diet as opposed to a caveman's diet. So we've got a question come in over the this is a question. I just want to put it to you because I think it's important. It relates to what we've talked about, and it's from Anne W. And she says that she's found calorie counting to be completely successful. She lost 10 stone, a lot of weight, 9 years ago by counting calories, and she has kept it off. So she wanted to say, so how has she been so successful?
I would say she's probably the exception to the rule in my experience. There is always
Am I still on?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
lifestyle. You getting me?
Yeah, we can. I
can
can see. I can see.
I would suggest that probably as part of that, calorie counting, being aware of what's in various different types of food, she's probably reduced her insulin level and probably improved her level of these essential fatty acids. But she'd probably be aware that her body wants to increase weight, and she's probably got to be quite cautious about the amount of activity she does and the amount of calories she takes in.
Yeah, I do think exercise does play a part in that from what I've read in your book.
Well, exercise is very important, not because it particularly burns off calories, because we know that as soon as you come from the gym, you get an increased appetite. Your body wants to put that energy that you've expended back into your body, which is why every gym has got a juice bar by it. But the way that I think exercise really works to reduce weight, and it definitely works, otherwise there wouldn't be a lot of gyms around, is that it improves your insulin sensitivity, so you don't need as much insulin. It also decreases your cortisol levels, so so both of these things will automatically slowly reduce your weight setting.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of things I really want to get onto, and I'll try and build the questions that we're getting in around it. If it's okay with everyone, and we might just go over a little bit as we've had a kind of break in the middle. But I was really interested, in this idea that our diet has changed so much, and you say that. That in our as you call it, our Western diet, our food supply to our human population here in the UK has changed to a canteen type food, and I wondered if you'd explain what that is and why it's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the canteen description of food actually applies to a lot of animal research where they've had either natural food or canteen food, and canteen food is the surrogate of a Western diet, which is high in vegetable oils and sugars and refined grains. And the book goes into the history of why we came to the current Western diet and the nutritional advice that we've been given. And when you look at the curve, the epidemiological curve of how many people were obese, over the decades from the 1960s onwards, you'll find that there was a really small increase in obesity rates up until 1980, and then the rate of obesity really took off a lot faster. And that coincided with the first government advice about what we should be eating. And the book goes into the detail of this. And the first government advice was basically based on this research of the time, which linked highly saturated natural fats with high cholesterol levels, and then by a separate sort of research process, high cholesterol levels with heart disease. So it was assumed that natural saturated fat caused higher rates of heart disease. And the book goes into the history of why that research sort of came about. And at the time, there was a big, fight between actually the sugar industry and the cattle industry about what was the cause. Was red meat the cause of heart disease, or was it sugar? And the sugar industry, paid a lot of scientists, only recently come to light, to write reviews and do research sort of which exonerated sugar and put the blame onto saturated fat. And subsequent research has really sort of slowly untangled and unraveled this hypothesis that natural saturated fats are a big risk factor for heart disease. In fact, when you look at the research, sugar and refined carbohydrates increase your triglyceride level, which is a much more powerful marker of cardiac risk. And because of all of this sort of flawed and biased, historical research, we still have this idea that, when you look at a juicy steak or some cheese or eggs, it's bad for you and we should avoid too much of it. Actually, it's not that bad for you. And what we've done in our diet is replace saturated fats with vegetable oils and refined carbohydrates and sugar. And this all started to happen in the 1980s, and it corresponds with, this increase in the rate of obesity. And the book sort of, it expands on, why polyunsaturated fatty acids, so basically vegetable oils that were replaced fats. So if you think in your kitchen, the butter was thrown away and margarine and flora came in. This is the perfect example of how our eating habits changed because of the diet heart hypothesis. So yeah, that's probably that's the explanation of the book as to how we got to our current way of eating, a lot of oily food, unnatural oils, and highly refined carbohydrates.
And did the French take this advice?
So yeah, again, this is explained in the book. I think that basically the French paradox is explained. So we know that the French actually sort of ignored conventional, dietary advice and wisdom, and have always liked to eat a lot of saturated fat and cook with it, and they have very saturated fat in their sweet course as well. Also, they drink a lot of alcohol. And they have been very resistant to the advance of the American and Westernized diet. And despite them eating a lot of fat, they have the lowest rate of obesity in Europe. And this is why it's a paradox, because people don't understand that fat doesn't make you fat and doesn't cause heart disease. But if you think it makes you fat and you see the French eating a lot of fat, then you have to call it the French paradox.
I see.
It's not explained. The explanation is that the theory is wrong.
So
it's not a paradox at all.
It's not a paradox at all to you. It's really important to understand that. Okay, let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So just so I fully understand it. So butter going out and Flora, which I think sponsored the marathon originally, coming in. Yeah. This was the start of a real problem for us in the UK in terms of our weight. Is this right?
Yeah. So, the first guidelines came in the I think the late 70s in America, and it was quickly, basically copied by European countries, including the UK, with this sort of. Suddenly, we were told by governments and scientists what to eat, whereas for decades and generations and hundreds of years before, we always took our eating advice from our close family members. Our grandmother would tell us how to cook and what to eat, and give us a little bit of culture behind our food. All of a sudden, in the 70s, this was taken away from us, and we were told by governments and scientists what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat, and when we should eat. Okay. This was the sort of advance of, I think, as Michael Pollan, a great food writer, puts it, nutritionalism. So this new science of breaking foods up into individual components and individual, parts, and trying to say, this part is good for you, this part is not good for you, and this part, it becoming extremely complicated. Whereas actually, that thinking about our food has eroded our food culture. So if you go around the world where they still actually, eat and cook locally produced foods, you'll find that population is not obese. It's only when you introduce a Western type eating pattern that a population will suffer with weight gain and obesity.
Okay. And so, it really is a case of olive oil and butter are far far
Yeah,
better.
so olive oil is a monounsaturated fat, and they're okay. I mean, the ones to avoid are the polyunsaturated fats. So these are any type of vegetable oil, so rapeseed oil, sunflower oil. Usually the ones with, labels saying, high in omega-3. Actually, the omega-3 is totally diluted by this really terrible omega-6. So they're the polyunsaturates that you should, throw away or not have in your kitchen. And saturated fats, which we sort of, we've been told for years not to cook with. Certainly my mum used to cook with lard. I think is probably the safest to cook with. It remains very, very stable even at high temperatures.
Okay, I think you heard it here first, cooking with lard. We're going to go...
Yeah. Retro.
We're going to go into more detail about omega-6 and omega-3. Actually, I've just got a comment on here from Julian Bergini. He's a fantastic writer. I think he introduced me to pollen. He wrote a book, The Virtues of the Table, about philosophy of food. And he says fatty acid ratios say more. So I presume if we're going into the omegas-3 and 6, we're doing this. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah, so, the final part of the book looks into the influence on these two essential fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6, on our bodies, our metabolism, and our weight set point. And so they're both polyunsaturates, so they're a type of fat, and they are unique in that we can't make them within our bodies. We can make every other fat. If we go on a low cholesterol diet, our liver can make an abundance of cholesterol from other components, but we can't make omega-3 and omega-6. Just like we can't make vitamin C and other vitamins. So in a way, they are the fat vitamins. They are essential to our diet. If we don't have them in our diet, we're going to get sick. And traditionally, if we look at cultures where the food is natural, the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 is 1 to 1, up to 1 to 4. So four times more omega-6 than omega-3, or about even sometimes. If you look at Western populations, the ratio is skewed towards omega-6 by about up to 20 or 30 to 1. So a massive shift in the ratio of these two essential fatty acids. And so individually, they are very, very different. So omega-3, which is the one that has been washed away by the Western diet, appears in, it's like basically spring foods, so green foods, or anything that's green or anything that's eaten, they're greens. So cattle that have eaten grass-fed cattle, that appears in omega-3. Omega-3 appears in greens, and in fact, omega-3 is the most abundant fat in the world. Even though it's you wouldn't think lettuce has a great deal of fat in it, there is so much greenery around the world that omega-3 is the most abundant fat. The problem with omega-3 is it oxidizes very, very fast. So it goes off very fast. And this is why foods with omega-3, such as fish and natural meats and various different vegetables, will go off within a few days of having them. Omega-6, on the other hand, is a more sort of autumn type food. It appears in nuts. And there's a shift in nature towards omega-6 as the seasons go on. And omega-6 is much more stable. It doesn't get oxidized. And food scientists have found that omega-6, is great for, food that needs to stay on the shelf for a long time. It doesn't go off. So if you're trying to sell canned products to another country, those canned products are not going to be worth a great deal if they go off within a month. But if they stay okay for a year, then they're going to be worth something. And in such a way, omega-6 has really found its way, in massive quantities into our Western food culture, where we trade, and there's a lot of food that stands on the shelf for a long time. In addition, it's obviously used in vegetable oils and in fast foods. So all of these things, when taken in by a population, will skew their omega-3 to 6 ratio massively to one side, massively to the omega-6 side. If we then look at actually what the action of omega-3 and 6 are on a sort of the level of our body, our cellular level, they are integrated into every single cell in our body. So the cell wall of our body has omega-3 and 6 on each and every one of the 4 trillion of them that there are. And they're competitive, and they reflect the amount of omega-3 and omega-6 taken in our diet. So in a way, they actually reflect the food on the high street actually reflects the ratio of these 2 fatty acids in every cell in your body. Omega-3 is great for insulin sensitivity. It will let insulin into the cell and let it do its job of dealing with glucose fluxes. Whereas omega-6 tends to block the action of insulin, meaning that you need more insulin, and you get this thing called insulin resistance, which is a precursor to type 2 diabetes. And the more insulin you have, going back to the weight set point theory, the higher your weight will come. In addition, omega-6 also causes inflammation in your body, and low-grade inflammation, again, has an effect on the weight control center in your brain, your hypothalamus, to block the messages of both insulin and another hormone, leptin, getting through. So they're essential fat vitamins. They've been skewed in the Western diet away from omega-3, which goes off and isn't very valuable to food producers, towards omega-6. That then appears on each cell of our bodies and has a profound effect on our inflammation and insulin signaling. So that's all sort of explained in the book.
Yeah, it's really important. It's difficult for us to understand. They've both got the same name, more or less. But
yes, omega-3 and omega-6, yeah.
But it's an absolutely crucial point.
I mean, so this is like, just to clarify, this is a hypothesis that appears in the book, backed up by, what patients say. So, for instance, a patient will say to me, and scores of patients have said to me, when I moved from America to England, actually I seamlessly lose weight without going on a diet. When I go back to America, I go to my American weight. When I go and live in Sardinia for a month, I lose even more weight. But then when I go back to America, I put the weight on, all without dieting. And that reflects the quality of the food and the quality of the fatty acids, or the level of fatty acids in those individual in those individual countries. Then when you start to look into the research, it really fits in with, patients' experiences of being in a particular food environment and actually either going up or decreasing in their weight seamlessly.
There's another difficulty with omega-6, in the sense that it makes us feel good. Yeah.
It's a precursor to, it's a cannabinoid precursor. So yeah, it does have hedonic effects in a low dose. So I mean, the book goes into the Western diet is very hedonic, and food scientists try.
I've got to raise the kind of big science words. What does that mean, Andrew?
Addictive.
Addictive.
It makes us feel great. So there's 2 things that are very addictive: sugar, and I think omega-6 containing vegetable oils and foods that are cooked in those. So obviously sugar goes to the same nerve pathways that are affected by opiate drugs. So cocaine, morphine, that sort of thing. So they will give you that type of buzz that opiates do in a much lower dose, but you do start to feel a little bit happier, maybe a little bit more talkative or whatever when you take sugar. In a similar respect, omega-6 fatty acids are precursors to cannabinoids, and when they get broken down, they give you a similar, low-grade buzz that you would get from taking in cannabis. And this is the reason that Western food, particularly fast food, is really addictive. And once you've had a burger, you want another one about an hour later, just as you would maybe get that side effect from taking in a dose of cannabinoids.
I know. I mean, and that was absolutely shocking to me, because up until that point, I really had been getting through lockdown by crisps. And
yes.
You suddenly realise how awful crisps are for omega-6. I think they're
Seriously,
off the
yeah.
scale on your list of foods.
And people will probably think that you're putting weight on because crisps have got a lot of calories in. Actually, no, it's probably the fact that the fats are altering your weight set point.
And the thing is with omega-6, just not to labour the point, but Julian did bring it up, and I think it's really, really important. It's a huge part of your work, and it's really essential to understand as part of this salon. Is you can't just eat your way out of high levels of omega-6 by avocado and broccoli, can you?
No, I mean there's a lot of fad sort of nutritional sort of advice and nutritionists sort of explaining to us what we should eat to increase your omega-3 level. For instance, walnuts are one that are rich in omega-3, but actually when you look at the amount of omega-6 in there, it's like totally outweighs the omega-3. So you can try and take in, a load of oily fish, which has got an abundance of omega-3 in, but actually if you cook it in vegetable oil, it's worthless. I think the book goes on to look at the amount of omega-6 in 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil, and then compares how much omega-3 supplements you would need to take to balance that as a one-to-one thing for your vegetable oil. And you need to take 28 tablets of omega-3. So you need to take a whole bottle of omega-3 supplements from Holland & Barrett in order to offset your 2 tablespoons of omega-6 from the vegetable oil.
It's terrifying, Andrew. And at one point you described that.
So you're right. So the way to normalize those levels is to throw away and be aware of the omega-6 containing foods.
No crisps.
No.
I've got it.
This is a trick. Don't ever give anything up, but try not to have it only as a treat.
Yeah, no, forget it. Yeah. And I mean, it's quite shocking. You say this deficiency in omega-3. At one point you say it's almost like scurvy. It's the effect that it could be having on our health.
Yeah, I mean that chapter where we introduce the sort of omega-3/6 hypothesis starts with looking historically at these diseases that we didn't really understand for a long time. So beriberi was one of them, a deficiency of vitamin B1, and scurvy, a deficiency of vitamin C. And for many, many years, these diseases were not understood as deficiencies. And for both examples, both beriberi and scurvy, many doctors blamed the personality and willpower psyche of the patients suffering from them. And in a similar way, at the moment, people who are obese really get blamed not only by society, but actually very many medical doctors for being weak-willed and maybe not having the personality to control, their appetites. So that chapter in the book brings in this sort of idea that maybe, in the future, when we do realize that maybe it is like a big imbalance of omega-3 to 6, and it is a sort of deficiency in that respect that triggers weight gain in many people, that actually we will look back at our misunderstanding of obesity and how we perceived it to the historical misunderstanding of scurvy and beriberi.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well put. I'm going to go to a few questions now because we're going to overrun a little bit, but thank you so much for your questions. They're really important. Question from David Varga, and he said, how do you avoid yo-yo diet effects? How do you reset your weight set point?
The last part of the book, which I was sort of encouraged by Penguin Publishers to write, I sort of didn't want it to give any advice. I just wanted to explain exactly how weight regulation worked, but they wanted me to give advice. And there's basically a 5-step sort of a plan to change various small things in your life. So the first and most important step, I think, is giving up sugar and refined carbohydrates like wheat. That can be actually quite difficult. So there's a section in that with a psychologist that I work with, because it is hedonic, it's a little bit addictive, and it's difficult to give up sugar and bread sometimes. That's the first step. The second step is to try and improve the quality of your sleep. The third step is to look at your activity and try and take up a hobby or an activity that you really enjoy. The fourth step is to look at the omega-3/6 ratio and actually, throw away those vegetable oils and omega-6 containing foods, and basically just to try and embrace cooking rather than, going for prepared foods, which tend to be much more unhealthy. And the final step then looks into, going a little bit lower carb than you would normally, but not going ketogenic. And the index in the book looks at a wide range of common foods and gives the glycemic load of these foods, so the amount of sugar contained within each of these foods, normal staple foods. And if you could get your glycemic load down from, I think, an average of 300 grams of glucose at the moment down towards 80 or 100, then I think your insulin profile will improve and your weight setting will slowly go down. So yeah, at the end of the book there is stepped advice to try and decrease that weight setting without ever thinking about calories.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
The other, obviously, an easy way to go low carb and whatever and give up sugar is to make sure that you're not scared of saturated fats.
Great. Thank you, David. That's a great question. Got a question from Catherine, and I feel her pain. I'm riding my bike every day for 2 months instead of driving with lockdown. Why haven't I lost weight?
It depends how fast she's riding the bike. I mean, I think you're probably, I would expect if someone's really exercising quite heavily for between half an hour or 45 minutes per day and really getting their heartbeat up and sweating and having an aerobic workout, that is going to have a really good effect on your your insulin and your cortisol profile, and over a period of time you're going to lose weight. One of the problems is that if you're doing muscular exercise, you actually go and grow muscle, and then your body shape may change a little bit, but when you go on the scales, you don't lose weight. So that could be the other explanation for it. The third explanation is if you're just doing really gentle exercise, you may be expending 200 or 300 calories, but actually your body's just going to put that back in because the exercise isn't aggressive enough.
Okay, thank you. Got a question from Amy who says, great talk. Thank you, Andrew. And saying, when you're describing how dieters go back up in weight following in diet, can you talk about how you discounted the idea that this is not just due to going back to poor diet choices out of habit?
Well, no, what normally happens is that people will go on a particular diet and they will lose some weight, but a diet tends to be, for instance, the meal replacement diets is a short-term thing, and then they will, their metabolism will have decreased substantially. I've got patients who eat like 1,200 kilocalories a day, and their weight has plateaued. They can't lose any more weight. Then you want to go back, and you sort of get a little bit disheartened quite often, and you may try and eat relatively healthy at first, but eventually you get disheartened because even eating healthy, you're putting weight back on, and then you just give up and go back to normal eating behavior and regain weight to, above your weight at the start of the diet. And that's the story that, scores and scores of people have told me, which sort of corroborates some of the research in the book.
Okay, thank you. Got one more question that I'm going to go for, and it's from Matthew. Hello, Matthew. How are you? And he's asking about fruit and omega-3. Is fruit a good source of omega-3?
So fruit's pretty neutral as far as omega-3 and 6 are concerned. We know that fruit has got a lot of sugar in. So the advice in the book is, try and avoid fruit juice if you can. Just have it as a special occasion, and probably have a maximum of two fresh fruits a day. But as far as omega-3 and 6 are concerned, fruits are very neutral.
Okay. And I just wanted to ask by saying, is lockdown a good opportunity to change our relationship with food, do you think, Andrew?
Well, I mean, it is a great opportunity, but at the same time, a lot of people are quite bored. Um, we were only allowed to go out once a day. People who used to go to the gym weren't allowed to go to the gym. Um, if you don't have any, most people actually have caught up on their Netflix, and it tends to go with, comfort eating a little bit. So at the same time, we did have a shortage of flour, so people are baking now. So I think people are cooking a lot more. So it is an opportunity, but also I think there's big dangers with lockdown. So
Big
it's difficult.
big dangers because of the eating feelings, boredom,
Yeah,
crisps.
maybe snacking on bad foods, and comfort eating maybe because everyone's a lot more stressed because of this.
Yeah, I did really like your advice, and I have followed it. To get a big chopping board, to get a really, really gorgeous knife, so it's pleasurable to kind of, chop vegetables, to, build your
Yeah,
relationship with a local fruit and vegetable, so you get into the habit of buying every couple of days, so you're increasing your likelihood of omega-3 and, eating green food every day. Felt that was very, very doable advice in lockdown.
yeah. I think if you get into the habit of cooking at home and you have this great environment with really nice sharp knives and chopping boards and a bit of music on or whatever, um, and maybe cooking with a family member if you can get someone else interested. It's very relaxing and meditative, and it's good for your soul as well as uh, your your metabolism and health.
Oh, and that's what it's all about. Okay, so I'm just gonna sum up. So we've got to eat like a Victorian chimney sweep, um, cook with lard, or at the very least throw away the rape seeds and the vegetable oils. Forget crisps or highly pleasurable but omega-6 appalling foodstuffs. And finally, buy Andrew's book from us.
Well, actually, the main advice is to enjoy yourself, embrace cooking, embrace saturated fat, embrace great food, uh, and yeah, enjoy the changes that will actually bring a really positive metabolic effect to your body, and then eventually, seamlessly, actually, your weight setting will go down. It won't be as drastic as a trendy low calorie diet, but actually, in 6 months or a year, you'll feel a lot healthier, and it will be sustained weight loss. That's the only way of really sustaining it, in my opinion.
Oh, it's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew, for talking us through your work and your book. It is really illuminating and life-changing. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, Helen. Thank you.
I'm just going to say goodbye and thank you so much for being part of this incredible salon, Why We Eat Too Much, the New Science of Appetite. You know that we are massive fans of book buying, not from them, but from us. We are a bookseller, and we really, really love connecting people with big ideas in books. So if you would like to get Andrew's book, we will be selling it on our Salon London site. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for being part of this incredible salon. I really hope it's given you some food for thought. Ha ha ha. And I very much look forward to seeing you again. This salon is now closed.